Welcome, friends, to another drive time. Um all of you folks commuting or at your job or mowing the lawn or however or wherever you listen to this thing. Um, I'm here to keep you company. So I write a lot. If you follow my career, I'm pretty prolific. I write a lot, but I read a lot. And in the many years before I became a full time writer, I read even more. I mean, I was a voracious reader, always had a book on me. A lot of bosses would complain, why do you have to have a book on you all the time at work? Because you never know. I might get stuck in the elevator for 2 hours and I got a book. It's like an emergency. And still to this day, I mean, I have in my glove compartment of my car is like this mini library of car books just in case I'm ever stuck anywhere. And I'm one of the only people that look forward to sitting in the waiting room at the doctor's office because it gives me a chance to read. So, if you're a constant reader, you know what I mean. And, back in the 70s and 80s, I was, reading all kinds of stuff. Kind of stopped reading the science fiction because science fiction kind of left me behind. I read all the science fiction books I wanted to read, and there were no new ones coming out that I was interested in. I was moving into other things like a hard-boiled crime, whodunit mysteries, historical fiction, and one of the guys I discovered was Sven Hassel. And Sven Hassel was kind of a phenomenon, not so much here in the United States, but in Europe, and really big in Britain. This guy sold 53 million copies of the 15 novels that he wrote that were purportedly semi autobiographical. They were all about this penal regiment of Panzer Grenadiers during World War II. Those are Germans, in case you went to public school. And a lot of the stories took place on the Russian front. There was some action in Italy. Um, and these were all, supposedly Sven Hassel was a Dane. This was the story we were told by the PR folks at his publisher. Sven Hassel was a Dane from Denmark, and he joined the German army when Germany basically took over Denmark, and served on the Eastern Front in Russia. And so a lot of the stuff is written from his firsthand experience. And when you read the books, you're like, yeah, this guy has some, you know, he didn't just read about all the stuff in books. He's got some insight here and language. He's originally written in German, so they're translated into English. And because they're translated into English in England, the translators decided to put a lot of uh, English slang. So a lot of these German soldiers sound like they come from the east end of London instead of Munich or Hamburg or Dusseldorf. But if you can get past that, these are good books. These are unblinking views of the war from the German perspective, and they're very fatalistic and defeatist. These guys are, after all, in a penal regiment. And Sven Hassel claimed that he was in a penal regiment, so he and occasionally makes himself a character in these stories, much like Kurt Vonnegut appearing as himself in Slaughterhouse Five. Sven Hassel appears in with this ragtag group of guys um, who are thrown together because they were thrown into the penal regiment. And you got thrown into the penal regiment, if you stole something or murdered somebody or assassinated an officer or rape or looting, or maybe you went home to see your mama without permission, and you get thrown into a penal regiment, and of course given the dirtiest job you end up being shock troops and all the rest. So these books are loaded with action and loaded with some great dialogue sequences as these guys bitch and carpet one another and give each other a hard time. They really are a bunch of amoral slobs, and probably pretty representative of a lot of what the German troops were like, particularly on the Russian front, which was a punishment. If you watch Hogan's Heroes, getting sent to the Russian front was practically a death sentence. and it was the death sentence for the German army. So anyway, how much of this is true? How much of Sven Hassel's life is accurately portrayed here? How much of his biography is, you know, the real deal? Now Hassel he lived into the 21st century, and as I said, he sold 53 million copies of these books all around the world. So he wasn't hurting. He lived in Barcelona, Spain. But how much of this was true? And J.D. Coates sent me a link to a video explaining some of this stuff. But I thought I'd talk about Sven Hassel myself rather than just send you a link to another person's video. And the video explores the guy's life. His name was not Sven Hassel. His name was Birger Peterson, which is a terrible name for an author, so no wonder he picked Sven Hassel. Much cooler name. And yes, he was in the German army. Pretty crazy, huh? And part of his story is true. He was, in fact, I had heard rumors that none of his story was true, and he was just some, British guy, writing under this name. But it turns out he really was joined the German army when the Germans invaded Denmark, and he was made part of a unit that was sent to Ukraine. Now, that is technically the Russian front, but the Eastern Front, but he was never in Russia. But his unit did see an awful lot of casualties, and he was caught stealing things and put into a penal unit. So all that part of it is true, and but his unit suffered so many casualties that they were basically all sent back to Denmark. The ones that survived, and and here the story takes kind of a dark turn because he's cashiered out of the army, out of this. They were called they were like the Nord units, of the Nord soldiers. They were soldiers from the Scandinavian countries, made part of the German army. And maybe you don't know, the German army was very much a lot of foreigners. Romanians, Tunisians were part of the German army. They were mountain troops. So the German army was not all Germans. Any case, it was an Irish battalion, because the Irish will go anywhere to fight the English. Anyway, so Sven Hassel, Birger Peterson, ends up back in Germany with no job, or back in Denmark with no job, and he decides to join the Danish equivalent of the Gestapo. And so he becomes one of those scary guys who, were dragging people away in the night to be tortured and all the rest of it. And when this was revealed to the Danish people, of course, his publisher stopped all publication of his books in Denmark because he was seen as a traitor, because he was arresting Danes at the behest of the Nazis. And his books were, basically banned in Denmark. There was a recall of books. I've never heard of this in my life, but the publisher actually recalled the books from the bookstores and refunded the bookstores for the recalled books, and destroyed all of them, and ceased publication. And Sven Hassel was not welcome in Denmark at all. But of course, by this time he had moved to Barcelona, Spain, living the good life, because his books continued to be published throughout Europe, not so much in the United States, but he, France, Germany, all over Europe, they continued to, possibly Japan, I'm not sure, possibly they continued to enjoy a large reading audience, which I was one of them. I mean, I read all of these. They're like salted peanuts. You start reading them and you can't stop. And so he's translated to many different languages, and 2 films were made, Wheels of Terror, and I forget the name of the other one, but 2 movies were made with largely English and American casts, rather than Germans, and they're okay. They fully represent the novels, because the novels have a you put these novels on film and they become grindhouse movies, because there's a lot of crazy stuff goes on, and they're extremely violent. Um, but the other thing that Hassel did was, in England, he launched this craze, this mania, in the late '60s through the '70s into the '80s for this kind of book, World War II books told from the German perspective. And of course, novelists write, actual Germans writing from the German perspective, not a whole lot of them out there, and certainly not enough to feed the hungry paperback market in Britain, where they were just churning these things out. Dozens and dozens of novels of you know, Stuka pilots and U-boat commanders, and one of my favorites, a Cossack unit that's allied with the Germans. And to feed this market, they hired a bunch of British writers to pose as Germans. So you get Wolf Kruger and Bruno Kraus and Leo Kessler and a whole bunch of other, Ottos and Ludwigs and stuff, writing these faux novels. Of course, these guys had no experience whatsoever. They weren't in the German army. So while a lot of them are really fun reads, they lack the feeling of authenticity that's in the Hassel novels, because he was there. So he's telling you stuff he saw. But some of these are a lot of fun. I mean, I've read tons of these as well, particularly the Cossack books, because they're just nuts. Just completely crazy. Now I'm going to put a link to the video below this, the video that J.D. Coates told me about, so you can watch that on your own and get even more information about Sven Hassel's dubious past. But at the end of the video, they list other authors who were traitors. Apparently, Hergé, the guy that created Tintin, was seen as a traitor by some in France. I don't know anything about that. I'll have to look into that. Apparently, he collaborated with the Nazis, but so many French people did collaborate with the Nazis. But they also list, and this is highly unfair, they list P.G. Wodehouse as collaborating with the Nazis, and this is not fair. Wodehouse had a house in France, and if you know anything about P.G. Wodehouse, he was very much like his characters. He kind of didn't know what was going on in the world. He wandered around kind of bemused all the time. He was not aware that the Germans, he was aware the Germans had invaded France, but not that they were getting as close as they did. And they arrested him and his wife, sitting at home. The German army shows up. He writes about this, and it's hysterical. And they allowed his wife to return to England, but they realized that in P.G. Wodehouse, they had quite the prisoner. P.G. Wodehouse was world famous. P.G. Wodehouse enjoyed a J.K. Rowling level of fame in the early part of the 20th century. Hugely popular all around the world. And millions of readers in Europe, United States, India. They went crazy for P.G. Wodehouse in India. Germany was a huge sensation in Germany. And his novels were serialized in the Saturday Evening Post. And just, this guy was, he was the real deal. He was a big name author and very, very prolific. He wrote 90 novels in his lifetime. And I don't even know how many short stories. Anyway, back to the story. The Germans arrest him, realize, hey, we got a major celebrity here. We're going to take him. Well, first of all, they put him in a prison camp just with everybody else. They did not at first realize who he was. And Wodehouse's complaints, and he does write about his time in the prison camp. His biggest complaint was the shortage of paper. He could not continue to write. I love this guy. He couldn't continue to write because he couldn't get enough paper. But because he couldn't write full manuscripts, he spent his time plotting. And a lot of some of the best Jeeves and Wooster's novels were plotted while he was a prisoner of the Reich. Now they quickly realize, because he begins, uh, amongst the prisoners, there were a lot of English prisoners taken. Well, they know who he is, and it becomes revealed that he is P.G. Wodehouse, and he's immediately taken to Berlin, and he's set up in a fabulous hotel room, and he's given a new wardrobe and allowed to clean up and everything else. And in exchange for this, what the Nazis want him to do is make a weekly radio broadcast to Britain. And he agrees because he's, as I said, he's kind of a bemused, befuddled kind of guy in real life. And he's given an opportunity to create. So he'll be able to write and produce these radio essays that will be broadcast to England. And this is where the English begin to think of him as a traitor, because he's aiding the Reich. But if you hear the broadcasts or read the transcripts of them, they're pretty innocuous. They're not really propaganda. He is not, in some cases, he's complaining about life in Nazi Germany, inconvenience and rationing and things like that. He never has a bad word to say about his captors, but he never has a good word to say either. And he does nothing in any of these radio broadcasts to promote Nazism or to promote Germany in any way. And a lot of them don't, they just deal with things that he's interested in, like golf and things like that. So eventually he is freed and returns to England, but he returns to England under a pall. People are like, oh, I'll never read him again, and he should be banned, and he shouldn't be published, and all the rest of it. In the United States, we didn't really care so much. I think in other countries they didn't care so much, but in England they really took it as a slight that Wodehouse had cooperated with the Nazis, but it's very much misrepresented by the media in England. And the media in England post-World War II was very left-wing. Socialism had briefly taken a hold in England, and so anybody who had anything to do with cooperating with Nazis in any way, no matter how innocuous, was made a villain. And it really wasn't until the major English literary lions came forward to defend Wodehouse that his reputation was restored. And mostly it was George Orwell, who wrote 1984 and Animal Farm. He wrote a very compelling essay because he knew Wodehouse, and he explained, you got to know who the guy is. He didn't know he was hurting anybody. He never in his life would consider betraying England, which obviously gets so much affection for it. His affection for England comes through in every paragraph of his work. And Orwell made the argument, and Orwell was the clincher. He was the closer. He convinced the British public that Wodehouse was just an amiable goof, as he often referred to himself. So so there you go. And the irony here is that his time in Nazi Germany, because he continued writing novels and things, was actually more productive than the year he spent in Hollywood, which is another whole story. Wodehouse in Hollywood is hysterical. There's a really good movie about Wodehouse being held captive. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but it's a very good movie about Wodehouse as a prisoner of war. Very touching and sympathetic. So speaking of writing and stuff like that, me and Joe Bennett got a book out, The Horseman 2. It's going to be an ongoing series, friends. We got Horseman 2. Joe's already drawn Horseman 3, I believe. And we're just moving on with this Hector Caballero and his adventures. We'll put the link below here. You can go right over to Rippaverse and order this thing. It's up for sale for a few more weeks. and I think you will be highly entertained. Joe and I are having a blast working on this character and evolving him. He's got a so one of my favorite things is to have not the pat origin for these characters, but like an ongoing origin. Um, Horseman has a very much a deconstructed storyline where things just keep going wrong for him, and he has to keep changing. And we're just throwing lots of surprises your way, and I think you will enjoy it. So anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this little rant about Sven Hassel. Whether you're familiar with his books or not, I think you would find that interesting. But you should check one or two out. And there are audiobooks, although I find the audiobooks really depressing to listen to. Because these are not feel good books from Herr Hassel. Anyway, that's it. Keep your eyes on the road, and I'll see you.